Elon Musk is developing a vehicle that could be a game changer for space travel. Starship, as it's known, will be a fully reusable transport system capable of carrying up to 100 people to the Red Planet. The founding ethos of Elon Musk's private spaceflight company, SpaceX, was to make life multiplanetary. This is partly motivated by existential threats, such as an asteroid strike big enough to wipe out humanity. Settling other planets would place some of the eggs in other baskets, sparing human civilization if one of them were to experience a cataclysm. In 2016, the entrepreneur outlined his rationale at an international conference in Mexico, saying, quote, "History is going to bifurcate along two directions. One path is we stay on Earth forever. Then there will be some eventual extinction event. The alternative is to become a spacefaring civilization and a multiplanetary species, which I hope you would agree is the right way to go." Musk has often spoken about his dream of building cities on Mars. He believes that settlements would need large numbers of people in order to become self-sustaining. Realizing this dream requires a vehicle that's up to task. Starship is a rocket and spacecraft combination that could ferry more than 100 people at a time to the Red Planet. The system is designed to be fully reusable, meaning the principal hardware elements are not discarded in the sea or allowed to burn up, as happens with some other launch systems, but are instead recovered from space. They can be refurbished and flown again, reducing the cost of the whole enterprise. At launch, the spacecraft, called Starship, will sit atop a rocket called Super Heavy. The combination system will stand 120 meters or 394 feet tall, and is also referred to as Starship. With its nose cone and landing fins, the stainless steel vehicle resembles the rocket ships from the golden age of science fiction. At the rear of the 50-meter or 160-foot-long craft are 6 highly efficient Raptor engines, developed over the course of a decade by SpaceX. The combustion takes place in stages, and the engine's design cuts the amount of propellant that's wasted. Towards the middle of the vehicle are the propellant tanks. These feed liquid methane, CH4, and liquid oxygen, O2, to the Raptors. Methane is the fuel, and oxygen acts as an oxidizer, a chemical that makes the fuel burn. The combination mix is dubbed methalox. The choice of fuel is unusual for rocket engines, but methane can generate plenty of thrust. It's also a prudent choice in light of Musk's design on Mars. The SpaceX founder says that CH4 could be synthesized from the Martian subsurface water and from atmospheric carbon dioxide, or CO2, using a chemical process known as the Sabatier reaction. Refueling Starship for the return trip to Earth using Martian resources would confer a level of self-sufficiency, making journeys both more feasible and cost-effective. Towards the front of the spacecraft, which is sometimes referred to as the upper stage, is a huge payload compartment that will be able to haul large cargo or people to destinations in deep space. Moving on to the rocket, measuring 70 meters, 230 feet long, Super Heavy will be fitted with 3,400 tons of cryogenic chilled methalox. It will be powered by around 32 Raptor engines and should achieve more than 70 meganewtons of maximum thrust. It should be able to lift at least 100 tons of payload and possibly as much as 150 tons to low Earth orbit. This will make Super Heavy more powerful than the immense Saturn V launcher used for the Apollo moon missions in the 1960s and 70s. Launch and refueling. As it ascends from the launch pad, the combined Starship system will begin to pitch over towards the intended orbit. When the upper stage separates in space, Super Heavy flips over while falling back towards Earth. As it descends, Super Heavy will deploy steel structures called grid fins, shaped a bit like potato waffles from the sides of the booster. These will help steer the rocket stage back towards its launch pad so it can be flown again. Previously, SpaceX had wanted to ignite Super Heavy's Raptor engines to guide it down to a precision landing on 6 steel legs. SpaceX does something similar with its first stage of its Falcon 9 rockets, landing them safely on the landing pads and drone ships after a launch. But this thinking has since changed. SpaceX now plans to catch the falling booster using an arm on the launch tower. This is the structure that provides engineers and crew members with access to the spacecraft and rocket while they are sitting on the pad before launch. Meanwhile, the Starship upper stage could be inserted into a parking orbit after separation, allowing it to be refilled with propellant. Musk explained during a conference keynote speech in 2017 that if you just fly Starship to orbit and don't do any sealing, it's pretty good and you'll get 150 tons to low Earth orbit, but you'll have no fuel to go anywhere. If you send up tankers and refill in orbit, you could refill the tanks all the way to the top and get 150 tons of payload all the way to Mars. To refuel, the spacecraft would dock, or mate, with another Starship already circling the Earth that acts solely as a propellant depot. What will Starship be used for? For long-haul trips to Mars and back, which could take up to 9 months each way, Musk is looking to install around 40 cabins in the payload area near the front of the upper stage, saying, quote, "You can conceivably have 5 or 6 people per cabin if you really wanted to crowd people in, but I think we would mostly expect to see 2 or 3 people per cabin, and so normally about 100 people per flight to Mars," Musk said. The payload bay would also host common areas, storage space, and a galley, as well as a shelter where people can gather to shield themselves from solar storms, where the sun belches out harmful charged particles into space. Starship would also play a part in NASA's Artemis program, which aims to establish a long-term human presence on the moon. In April 2021, the US Space Agency awarded SpaceX with a $2.89 billion contract to develop Starship into a lander capable of delivering astronauts to the lunar surface this decade. The version tailored for the Artemis flights would not possess the heat shield or flaps necessary for a return journey to Earth. Instead, the Starship's human landing system would remain in space after its initial launch from Earth, to be used for multiple trips between lunar orbit and the moon's surface. The uncrewed or cargo version of Starship features a payload bay that opens up like the mouth of a crocodile. This would allow it to be used for launching satellites. SpaceX says the huge payload capacity opens up possibilities for new types of robotic science missions, including telescopes larger than the James Webb Observatory, the forthcoming successor to the Hubble. The system could also be used for space tourism and even for high-speed journeys between different destinations on Earth. Musk says that Starship could eventually carry people to destinations in the greater solar system, including gas giants like Jupiter. But this remains a long-term objective. How does the upper stage land? In order to bring other spacecraft back to Earth, engineers have relied on parachutes or designed the vehicle so that it can land on a runway. But the Starship upper stage takes a different approach. When it's ready to land, the ship initially re-enters the atmosphere at a 60-degree angle, and then belly flops to the ground in the horizontal position. This mode of return relies entirely on the atmosphere to slow down the vehicle's descent. The downside is that in this configuration, Starship is inherently unstable. The vehicle therefore uses 4 steel flaps positioned near the front and rear of the vehicle to control its descent. This is much like a skydiver uses their arms and legs to control a freefall. Elon Musk said during a Starship update in 2019 that it's, quote, "different from anything else. We're doing a controlled fall." He further added that one is trying to create a drag rather than a lift. It's really the opposite of an aircraft. As Starship approaches the ground, it should be slow enough to execute an engine burn that flips the vehicle into a vertical position. It then uses the Raptors as retro rockets to guide the vehicle down to a safe landing. Musk says this general approach could be used to bring Starship down safely on any planetary surface in the solar system. In the last few years, SpaceX has tested various prototypes of the upper stage at its Starbase facility in Boca Chica, Texas. The company started off in 2019 with a 39-meter-tall test article called Starhopper, which bore a passing resemblance to a water tower. It flew to 150 meters above the ground. The first prototype to feature a nose cone and flaps, Starship serial number SN8, flew to an altitude of 12.5 kilometers in December 2020. It belly flopped back to Earth, giving SpaceX valuable engineering data about the final part of the vehicle's return from space. However, SN8 approached the landing pad a bit too fast and hard, causing it to crumple and explode. 3 more test articles exploded before Starship SN15 achieved success with a soft landing in May of 2021. SpaceX plans to launch Starship on Super Heavy for its first orbital test flight sometime in 2021. Elon Musk has promised a lunar excursion in 2023 to the Japanese online retail billionaire Yusaku Maezawa. And Starship will also carry astronauts from the lunar orbit to the surface of the moon as part of NASA's Artemis 3 mission, which is also targeted for 2024. Musk also says he will launch one of the vehicles in an uncrewed flight to Mars in 2024. Even if the SpaceX's founders' timelines have seemed optimistic at times, he has also developed a reputation for eventually achieving his goals, no matter how ambitious. Now that you've watched the video, let us know what you think about SpaceX's Starship by dropping a comment in the comment section below. Thanks!